Yeah, I'm Scott Hansen from Southern Utah University, and this module of SolidWorks will contain instruction on how to create an assembly using the 5 parts that were created in the last 5 previous modules. So we'll move our cursor to the little white piece of paper. We'll left click one time, and up to this point we have selected part for quite a few of what we've done. We did do one assembly back in module 6. And we've also done drawings. So we're going to left click on the assembly icon this time rather than the part icon, and left click on OK. And you'll notice the tools are different than what's in the part area. Here is the editing, inserting, and the manipulation of existing models that will be put into an assembly. The begin model assembly box is open. If the parts that we have created were left open, they would appear in the Open Documents box. If you left yours open, they should appear here. If not, we'll have to browse for them. The first thing we're going to insert is the piston case. So I'll left click on the piston case and left click on Open. And the piston case should appear. It'll be attached to the cursor. We'll simply left click one time. Then we'll move our cursor to the Insert Components command. Left click on Insert Components. This same dialog box comes up. It just has different text in here. We'll hit Browse. Now we can bring in each one of the parts. Left click, Insert Component, Browse, Crankshaft, Open, and we'll insert component, browse, piston, open, and insert components, browse, wrist pin, open, left click, placing that, and we should have our 5 parts made up for the assembly. Now if we need to rotate a part around, probably wouldn't be a bad idea to rotate this piston around so that it gets inserted into the hole facing the right direction. To do that, we move our cursor up to the Move Component icon. There's a little arrow underneath that. We drop that down and we left click on Rotate Component. Move our cursor right over the piston and left click one time, holding the left mouse button down, and it'll rotate the part around while the rest of the assembly stays in the same view. Then we'll left click on the green check mark. Then we'll push the mouse wheel down. Let's rotate the entire assembly up so that we have a nice view of it from the side. Then we'll wheel it out and wheel it back. So the first constraint we're going to add, known as a mate, is the piston into the cylinder bore. I'm going to left click and drag out the connecting rod, the crankshaft, and the wrist pin, so that we have kind of a easier access to the cylinder bore. I'll move my cursor to the mate command, little paper clip. I'm going to left click on mate, and I'm going to just move the cursor over the entire piston. When the whole thing lights up, we'll left click one time. Move the cursor inside the cylinder bore. When the entire cylinder bore lights up, left click once. If SolidWorks moves the part into place as it just did, that means that we're good to go and there's no conflicts. We'll left click on the green check mark twice. Now if I take my cursor, left click on the part and holding the left mouse button down, I can drag the piston in out of this bore, and it will stay on that center because that's where it's been mated or constrained. And then I'm going to left click out in the workspace so we don't have a surface selected that we don't want selected. The next thing, we'll mate the connecting rod to the wrist pin hole. So we'll left click on mate. I'm going to zoom in to this area here. Left click once the hole becomes lit up, the entire hole. Move my cursor inside the wrist pin hole when it becomes lit up. Left click one time. Left click on the green check mark twice. And then we'll move the connecting rod over to the piston as best we can. I'm going to scroll out with my mouse and then scroll back. Now I'm able to move the connecting rod in there. If for some reason you're unable to, you simply move your cursor over the piston right click once and you left click on Fix, and now that makes it so the piston will not move, making it easier to move the connecting rod into place. It will have to be what they call floated once we get ready to animate the assembly. So now that I've got the piston, the connecting rod kind of where I want, I can float the piston. We left click, right click, and the pop-up menu shows up. We left click on float. Now the piston will move back and forth freely. So I'm going to click out here in the workspace, push the mouse wheel down, move our cursor inside here, then we'll left click on mate, left click on the side of the connecting rod. I'm going to push the mouse wheel down and try and get access in here. I'm going to zoom in here, and I'm going to left click on the side of the piston. Then we'll left click on the distance icon over here, which looks like is inactive but really isn't, and we'll enter 0.25 and then hit enter, and SolidWorks will move that connecting rod 1/4 of an inch off. Those faces will be parallel, but there's a 1/4 inch gap between them. We'll left click on the green check mark twice. We'll left click, or excuse me, roll the mouse wheel out, and so now we have the connecting rod put in place. Our next step is to install the crankshaft. So I'm going to left click in the workspace so I don't have anything selected. I'm going to move my cursor to the mate command, left click on mate. I'll move the cursor inside the piston case hole that's shown. Once the entire hole becomes highlighted, we left click once. I'm going to push the mouse wheel down. I'm going to move my cursor up to the pin extrusion on the back side of the crankshaft. When it becomes highlighted, I'll left click once. Now it wants to insert this in the wrong direction, so I'm going to move my cursor over here to the mate alignment icon. I'm going to left click and it will flip it over, and I'll left click on the green check mark, and I'll just move the cursor, take the cursor and move the crankshaft closer to where it's supposed to be. Then we'll left click one time. Now we'll insert the wrist pin into the wrist pin hole in the piston. I'm going to push the mouse wheel down, rotate the model around. I'm going to left click on the mate command. I'm going to left click on the wrist pin. When the entire wrist pin becomes highlighted, left click once. Move the cursor inside the wrist pin hole, left click once it becomes highlighted, and we'll left click on the green check mark twice. So the wrist pin is now mated to the center of the wrist pin hole, and as you can see, I'm unable to move the wrist pin into the piston hole location. So I'm going to left click in the workspace. I'm going to move my cursor over the piston. I'm going to right click. I'm going to left click on Fix. Now I can slide that piston pin in there closer to where it's going to be mated. Notice that the piston will not move back and forth. Now while the piston's highlighted, I'm going to right click. I'm going to left click on Float. And I'm going to left click and drag the piston. I can drag it upward or downward now. I'm going to left click out in the workspace. We have two more constraints left. We're going to constrain the connecting rod journal to the crankshaft journal. So click out in the workspace so nothing is highlighted. We'll left click on the mate command. I'm going to move my cursor over the crankshaft pin. When the entire pin becomes highlighted, we'll left click once. We'll move our cursor inside the hole or journal of the connecting rod. We'll left click once it becomes highlighted, and then we'll left click on the green check mark twice, and we can turn the wheel around the crankshaft. And we have one last constraint to do, and that is a surface constraint from this surface to this surface. So left click out in the workspace to ensure that nothing has been selected. We'll left click on the mate command. We'll move our cursor to the side of the connecting rod, left click one time, move it to the top of the crankshaft pin or journal, Left click once. SolidWorks will just make those nice and flush, which is what we want. We'll left click on the green check mark twice, and we'll push the mouse wheel down and rotate it around, and we have now created an assembly of the parts that were created in the last several modules. Now if you notice, there are some built-in problems with our assembly. First problem is the crankshaft interferes with the piston. We don't even have the clash detection on to see that. Also, the piston doesn't even go up in the cylinder bore hardly at all, just barely. And then last, our crankshaft pin doesn't even protrude through the case. So these are things that we will deal with in the next module. So save this assembly the way it is, and then in the next module we will go through some edits on how to edit a sketch and edit a feature to correct these problems. And this concludes this module on the creation of an assembly in SolidWorks.